the four, the four, that's AI. The, uh, the, the, the swamps that I cross and the getting myself into trouble that I am responsible for many times, the mountains I climb, the cliffs that I fall off from, the crawling, the getting up, and the continuing the journey that I experience. Understanding life as a journey helps me to negotiate a complexity that other understandings don't give me. And so from my personal perspective, I have learned not to blame anyone, but have learned to appreciate that as a child of God, I learned to know my God as well as I live and walk in the privilege that is life. I had just been talking and was quite late, and hence missed my friend Lily, who would normally pick me up, with some other young Solomon Islander this morning. And same thing happened as soon as I landed at the hotel. Another young Solomon Islander stopped me at the door, and we had conversations. That is only to say that while I have a set of slides, and there are lots of slides, I actually don't speak to all of them. And the problem I will have is to indicate, just move on. And so if you see me looking at Lily and team, it's only because I'm wanting them to move on. There are a number of numerous concepts in the topic of our attention this morning, and I will not do justice to all of them. However, I shall hope to, I'm hoping to hopefully encourage you. I'm hoping to encourage you by throwing out a few ideas. There are three parts to this conversation this morning. Very conscious of time, I also want to say maybe at the end of each part, we might even have a talanoa so that we can respond and have a conversation. All of us know about schooling. All of us know about, I suppose, what we in the formal sector call education. But generally speaking, when we are talking about education as Pacific Islanders, we know that we are actually talking about schooling. So we will have a conversation about some of the philosophical ideas behind schooling in our Pacific Island settings. And secondly, we will talk about a case study to understand philosophical ideas behind, in this case, indigenous Malaita theocratic communities or intellectual traditions. And then thirdly, we'll end on a more positive note by offering some storied examples of attempts at changing the narratives and showing examples of actual straddling of the worlds of paper wisdom and knowledge that's book-based and contextual wisdom that is our ways of life and living, by really showing examples of young Pacific Islanders who are already doing the thinking. I have written quite a bit on education, and in one of maybe a 2020 article, I had tried to capture some of the intellectual thinking that has been happening in the Pacific education space for the last 2 decades. So there's quite a bit there. So as an educator and a mobilizer of our thought leaders, this conversation is very welcomed because some of us in the education space have been onto it for quite a bit, or at least for 2.5 decades or so, in a concerted sense. So for me, linking with this initiative is very important. And honestly, I have been linking with this community. Kasi continues to invite me along, and Professor Upolu. And so I have fun when I come to PTC kind of conversations because that's where my heart is as well. So pardon me if I talk about paper kind of contributions. Again, as I said, because I philosophically live a storied life, I appreciate the wisdom that I get, the learnings that I get from whatever the source is. I use my ears a lot in learning. I use my eyes a lot. I learn in silence a lot. I think quite a bit. I have ways of habitually forcing myself to learn. I use one of this question a day, irritating question a day to respond to every morning. I make notes every night, reflecting on the day. Of course, every morning I try and hear what God is saying to me. I don't eat until I hear what God is saying to me in that morning. So those are habitual, intentional ways of life to help myself as a leader. I'm saying that only to encourage you with your own habits, with your own leadership habits. Some of you, like me too, I have a leadership prayer which I say every day. At least that's the first thing I do when I go to my office or when I start to open my book. So there are good habitual things. And if we understand life as a storied experience, of course, we will then develop the capacities needed not to be spending our energy fighting with each other or fighting with whoever it is we are wanting to have a fight with. So I draw on wisdom from the books, just like all of us. And so, excuse me, Lily, I'm going to give instruction to you now. Look at me all the time, because otherwise I'll be going on the sideways. So, yeah, and before we talk about education, again, none of those is new to any of us. We know what the general articulation of a definition is to education. We know some of the purposes for education. At least there are 3 main purposes that the books tell us. Again, we are talking about schooling here. So we're not talking about education as is understood as indigenous intellectual traditions. And so here we are, I'm offering, again, in a historical sense, the development of philosophical ideas that are influencing or underpinning schooling, even as we are experiencing in the Pacific. Now, in New Zealand, we have a new government, for instance, and when the new government came in, they said, let's go back to the basics in education. So they demanded a return to basics in education. They increased the number of hours for teaching math, the 3 R's, arithmetic, writing, and something else. What's the third R? Reading, right, reading English. So And then, of course, all the teachers were not happy because the teachers were used to helping the children play at school or taking them out to visit the park or something like that. Now, this new government in New Zealand was saying, if we look at the PISA results for New Zealand is way down there. And so we're not happy with that. We want to be up there when you look at New Zealand as compared to the rest of the world. Of course, they were responding to stats like that. And that's why, as a government policy, they are saying, no, let's return, give more time to reading and writing, give more time to arithmetic, give more time to the STEM subjects more. Of course, at the political level, you hear ideas like that. And then at the operational level, teachers will have to look at, okay, what is the curriculum now? How much time do we give that curriculum? Who does the teaching? How do we do the teaching? Behind the policy or the curriculum or the practice of teaching are actually philosophical explanations. I was just giving you an example of the philosophical idea we call essentialism, number one. The point I'm making here is forget all the hard words. I have just made the point that besides or behind every educational idea or teaching practice or a particular content material that is deemed to be important or a particular policy emphasis are actually explanations, are actually ideas that have been thought through. Again, I come from New Zealand, so I'm using the word matariki. I'm not sure what the Rotumans will say or the Samoans or the Fijians, but underpinning philosophies are what I call, they're like clusters of stars. So essentialism, again, I'm using that big word that I don't know myself, as a philosophy represents or can be, in a metaphorical sense, referred to as a cluster of stars. And in that philosophy, that cluster of stars, one star is actually what is assumed to be the nature of that thing. And so the big word ontology, and so on and so forth. So its philosophy represents a cluster of stars, and those different stars that make up the cluster are what I have listed out there. And so when you are, as a good student of philosophy, you will want to articulate very clearly what those stars are in the dimension of ontology, the dimension of knowledge, the dimension of axiology, which is the dimension of ethics. So ethics, when we come to talk about ethics, that's the dimension of axiology. Anyway, I was just putting that up to point that out. Move on. Okay, so rather than go through all the different philosophies that influence our schooling system in any of our countries, I'll just probably go with one, just to explain it, and then we'll stop for a Talanoa. Only to say that if I do write the paper, I'll write the whole thing so that it's there on paper. Let's move from the essentialism to maybe the one that is currently influential right now. Number 6. Go for it. Go down, just go down, yeah. Number 6, yeah. Okay, so you will have seen I've missed the others. So let's focus on number 6. This philosophy, in the books, they call it Reconstructionism. And that cluster of star and how it influences our education or our schooling ideas and systems. Okay, see, the basic assumption behind this philosophy of education is that education is there to help students question the taken for granted or the assumptions about society, about the systems that are in place, the structures that are there. And education is about getting students to be activists, to be critical. I just finished teaching a course over the weekend in Wellington. And in that master's course, two of my students were saying they were activists. And I said, that's interesting. And I asked one of them, so why are you an activist? Because I'm not happy. And then they were saying, okay, tell me about what you are doing. And then that student said they were protesting for freedom for this particular people group in the world. And I said, why are you protesting in their support? Because they are colonizing them, or because of, and I said, do you know anything else? And they said, no, that's all I know. So this philosophy pushes students to question both the superstructures as well as the subjective manifestations of those structures within society. And therefore, much of our both the rights-based or justice futures-oriented scholarship is really coming at understanding the world from a reconstructionism perspective. There are two main premises in this philosophy as is listed there. And so this philosophy sees students as activists. So when students begin to learn to question authority or question the system or protest, that's what this philosophical idea is seeing as an outcome of education or outcome of schooling. When they are in an agenic sense, calling for change to whatever it is, whether it's an indigenous family hierarchical system within your village, or whether it's pushing the church minister in the congregation or criticizing whatever. Much of that is an end point. It's a terminal point for learning. Again, students assuming responsibility for doing something about whatever it is that they see as not just within their context. So those are learning outcomes for this kind of philosophy. Methodologically, the teacher then facilitates learning by student. The teacher that stands up front and instructs students, that's a different philosophy of teaching. Whereas methodologically, this philosophy sees the teacher as someone who is there to come alongside the students, to help them be the animators of their own readings of injustice that they are seeing around them. From a teaching perspective as well, critical pedagogy, critical theories, conscious raising kind of liberation ideas, those are teaching methodologies that are very strongly within this philosophical thought tradition. Of course, there are good points about this philosophical cluster of ideas. In this case, yes, education is not just about sustaining the goodness of a family or of a school or of society generally, but it's also about reforming that unit, reforming that system. one of the strong points as well about this philosophical idea is that education broadens, opens the eyes of the learners to a world which is much bigger. And of course, education in a moral sense helps them to learn to be just, to learn to be care. Those are great things about this philosophical idea. On the other hand, there are other weaknesses as well. Often, this philosophy overemphasizes social immorality. The system is not good. The structures are not good. Government is not good. But it downplays personal immorality. So when I talked with two of my students in the weekend, of course, they were out there politically very active. And when I talked one-on-one with them, I found out that what they were mouthing as the animation of that which is good was not necessarily a personal, consistent living. But that's again, that's a weakness of this philosophical understanding. Again, the other point there is important: the assumption of being a victim, and consequently having a negative mindset, or finding it difficult to really see good, even in that which is not experientially good. And the other thing, which again is part of the spirit, what I call the spirit of the times, is we are creating, at least in my university, we are creating a lot of angry students. Anger, as you know, all the Talatalas in the room will know anger is good. Righteous anger is good. But when people are habitually angry, it's hard to be content. It's hard to see the good, even in times that are not as good. Basically, let's stop after this slide and invite some first conversations. There are philosophical assumptions behind educational policy, behind educational curriculum, behind educational outcomes, behind educational pedagogy, and so on and so forth. And generally, in our Pacific Island education systems, the different philosophical ideas are actually influencing. So they're all at play. It's not as if this idea is now out of date and we have moved on. So there's lots of the influences coming in. And as we are trying to summarize there, some philosophical families of ideas are good in emphasizing one thing, and other philosophical ideas are good at emphasizing something else. And so in that sense, as thought leaders, negotiating the underpinning ideas behind the policies and the political emphasis and the pedagogical or unionized political nature of education is something that the thinkers of the Pacific need to be well grounded on, so that we can offer the wholesome advice and support that is needed. Let me stop there for now and invite our first Talanoa. Thank you. Put your hand up. Just feel free to use your mics. Make a comment before we. Pasik, go ahead.
Just a question on where do you see generally where do you see Pacifica philosophies coming into play in terms of education?
Right. Where do I see Pacific philosophies come into play?
According to the categories that the different schools of philosophy.
Right. Okay, so fundamentally, these philosophies focus on the individual. Fundamentally, also, these philosophies assume that the world is material. So, at the surface level, we can say, oh yeah, Pacific philosophies will share that belief as well. But let's go on to an example of Pacific philosophies now, shall we? Okay, so I have only 10 minutes before the next speaker. So we'll rush very quickly. Go. Lily. Okay, so I'll take you to Malaita with me. The next slide. Section 2, part 2. We'll go exploring. Here is a village in central Malaita. And of course, like the Fijian setting, that's not just a piece of geography. In a Malaita village, there are different spaces that I can see in that village. That's actually a Christian village. I can see a church at the top there, yeah. And then usually in Malaita villages, the church is usually towards the top end of the village. If it's a side of a hill, they'll put the church slightly up. And I could see an opening space there. And I could see at least 4 households. Malaita villages are hamlets. They are not large villages. So there are 4 households there, possibly a father and his sons and their families. So that's it. We'll come to the next one for me to explain indigenous theocratic philosophy and consequently ethics. So I'm holding the two together. I've written on indigenous Malaita ethics quite a bit. There's quite a few papers out there. We won't have time to talk about them, but I'll try and hold them together to show that in a Malaita understanding or intellectual tradition, because it's an integrated understanding of the world, you can't separate education from ethics or anything like that. So we'll talk about them. In talking about ethics in Malaita, or even education in tribal theocratic Malaita, there are key ideas. So in terms of the domains that we must talk about in education, yes, knowledges are important, but beliefs that are metaphysical in nature are very important. And of course, manifestations, whether they are behavioral, whether they are protocol, or whether they are practice, ways of life, the good and the values that are represented in that which is considered good, those are important. There are also 3 relationships in talking about indigenous Malaita philosophy that are important, and ethics. There's always vertical relationships that are important. So vertical relationships are important in the philosophies that we captured earlier. You don't have that. In theocratic Malaita, vertical relationships are important. Horizontal relationships are important. Relationships between people, relationship between the world that is physical is important. And of course, in Malaita philosophical mind, counterbalance, relationships that are there in order to ensure harmony of balance. Although even if they are contradictory, is very important in theocratic understanding of the world. Having said that, let's move on very quickly. There's another village. This one is hidden. Okay, sorry, pardon me for using the word hidden. This is a tribal, non-Christian Malaita village. So at the top is the men's house. The top meaning side of the hill. But in many Malaitan theocratic understanding, central to the Malaitan mind is the concept that we call Abu, which in some Polynesian linguistic groupings you might use Tapu. So central to all Malaitan philosophical understanding is Abu. Abu as an axiological value. So that's central. That's the pillar to being Malaitan. And so every space in a Malaitan understanding, in a village like that, there are different spaces. So the men's house and the women's communal house, and then at the other end of the village is the woman's private bisi. Bisi is the menstrual hut, and that's where they give birth on their own as women. And then in the middle you have the family house. In tribal Malaita setting, only the mother and daughters and maybe the small boys will stay in the family house. I grew up in a boys' house, so I never really stayed with my mothers. So we grew up in a boys' house, and then we moved on to the men's house. But each space is a space for education. Each space is a space for socialization, for the ethical socialization of members, for character spacing. Move on to the next slide. So if I conceptually frame that, right in number one, in every Malaitan understanding of philosophy and ethics, number one is the communal space. In the middle of the village there's a space. That's where girls and boys, children can play. Men and women can come and stand, and if there's a meeting, they'll do it there. That's the communal space. That's where public knowledge is shared. And then space number two, the family dwelling for the children and women, and the family dwelling where men can come in as well to the main part. That's the space of family socialization. So education that's on secret knowledge is actually happening in the twos. In Malaitan understanding of that which is tapu or that which is abu, there are two horizontal, two lines going from 1, 2 through 4. And so the degree of purity actually increases as you go from 1 to 4 and then 1 to 4 to the other side. So there are two complementary notions of goodness, of purity, of holiness, and consequently with the associated power going in both directions. And anthropologists going to Malaita have made the mistake of seeing the men's house there and seeing the shrines there as if it's a hierarchical relationship. In Malaita understanding, it's not a hierarchical relationship. It's a complementary, distinct spaces, but the level, if power is the issue of concern, it goes both ways, strong as they go towards the end. So all the tribal shrines, the women also have their own shrines past the menstrual place. But every single space is where education happens. Public knowledge, secret knowledge, sacred knowledge. Anyway, we'll have this written properly. Finally, let's move on. Anyway, that diagram is only to say that much of our schooling is focusing on outcomes, focusing on teaching methods, and focusing on curriculum. Very transactional focus. If you ask our educational policy makers, why are you doing that? what is the worldview behind the curriculum or the teaching method, usually they don't have an answer. They don't know. And that's one. I'll show it in the next slide. Show it in the next slide. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I didn't have that slide. Oh, maybe somewhere in there. I was using a Solomon Island example to show it. I used the curriculum framework for Solomon to show that there's no thinking in the mechanical things they're offering for schooling in the Solomons. Good news story. Yeah, young people, educational thinkers in the Pacific are thinking, have been thinking about negotiating this space between inherited wisdom that we appreciate, that are coming to us from the books, but also the inherited wisdom that is of context, that comes to us from our parents, that comes to us from our oral intellectual traditions. Patrick Dadao developed the curriculum, house curriculum for Solomon Islands. Next slide. Seula Fua developed the Faleako framework, which by the way had influenced teacher training, curriculum development in Tonga for a few years now. They still use it today. Move on. Stanley Homer developed the canoe framework for leadership in South Malaita, which we used in schooling socialization for principals in the Solomons by using the canoe framework. Next one. Some years ago, I developed a policy framework for educational aid in the Solomons, and we had used it again, coming at aid from a storied approach to living our lives, encouraging the Solomon Islanders to take ownership. Otherwise, the donors will just be the ones thinking, and we are not thinking. Anyway, next one. Anyway, few learnings from that we can conclude. But as I said, philosophical influences are not just from the books to us. No, they're multidirectional. Yeah, as animators of our lives, we actually influence. We make the things happen. We use the metaphors we use. We teach the values that we ourselves think are important, even when the books say we should do this or that. So just appreciate that they're coming all over and see everything that's out there as potential gifts. Use the tools that are available to you. Be the leaders of your time. Anyway, there are other things I could say, but otherwise I'll stop there. Only to say that there's much that we can claim in the space that is there for us as thought leaders of our region. Let's claim the mind space and not just worry about the operational resources that we put so much emphasis on, like money or who has power. Make our educational choices familiar to our people. Start with that which is already them, as opposed to that which is they are not yet. That which is the abstract idea. Start with the metaphors that's already there. In that way, we are supporting them to be the best of themselves as God had gifted them or endowed them in their context. Raise the flag so that the flag that is godly, indigenous, familial, contextual wisdom is raised. Not necessarily because you want someone else to fly that flag. No, you're just flying the flag. And it is in flying the flag that we have more time to have the conversations, to educate, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you, Emily. By the way, as a show and tell, this book in tribal language contains some of the moral philosophies of the conceptual diagram that I was giving in talking about tribal Malaita understandings of education and consequently morality. Thank you.